The morning of the event was calm, but Sundar Pichai's heart was not. The grand auditorium in Delhi buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of students, dignitaries, scientists, and journalists had gathered for a special event celebrating India's contributions to global technology. Banners hung with quotes about innovation and resilience. The air was warm with expectation. Everyone knew the Prime Minister would be there. Everyone expected the spotlight to shine on Sundar Pichai, the humble man from Madurai, who rose to become the CEO of one of the world's biggest companies. Sundar stood backstage, quiet and thoughtful. He had been to many such events before. He had spoken at conferences across the world, but today felt different. There was something in the air, something he could not quite explain. He looked down at his shoes, polished carefully that morning, and thought about his mother, Lakshmi Pichai. Her name had not been mentioned in any speech, in any press release, or on any invitation card. Yet she was the reason he stood where he did. She had worked long hours, stitched clothes in a cramped room, saved every rupee, and stayed up at night sewing school bags when Sundar's broke. He had never forgotten the smell of fabric and sweat that filled their small home. He had never forgotten the sacrifices she made. She never asked for praise. She never even asked for thanks. As the host announced the arrival of the Prime Minister, the crowd stood up in applause. Sundar joined them, clapping politely, but his mind was still with his mother. Was she watching this? Would she feel proud? Prime Minister Narendra Modi walked to the stage with his usual calm presence. He greeted everyone, smiled kindly, and began speaking about the strength of India's minds and hearts. Sundar listened closely, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. The Prime Minister paused, looked around the room, and then said in a gentle voice, "Today, we celebrate the journey of a son of India, Sundar Pichai, a man who brought pride to our country. But let me tell you about a woman behind him, a quiet hero. Her name is Lakshmi Pichai." The crowd fell silent. Sundar's single quote's heart stopped. Lakshmi did not speak on world stages. She did not sit in boardrooms, but she stitched dreams with her hands. She worked late into the night so her son could study in light. She gave up her comforts so he could have his books. She is the kind of mother who built India's future without asking for anything in return. Sundar lowered his head, his vision blurred with tears. "We often talk about success," the Prime Minister continued, "but true success is when we remember those who made it possible. Lakshmi Pichai is not just Sundar's mother, she is India's strength." Sundar could not breathe for a moment. It was as if someone had opened a door in his heart that had been closed for years. Backstage, one of the staff offered him a tissue. He took it slowly, hands trembling. "Sir," the young woman said softly, "I lost my mother last year. Your story, your mother's story, it reminded me of her." "Thank you." Sundar could not reply. His voice was caught in his throat. The event moved on, but inside Sundar, something had changed forever. After the speech, as he walked to the stage to give his address, the entire room stood and applauded. Not just for him, not just for the CEO, but for Lakshmi Pichai, for every mother like her. He stood at the podium, looked into the sea of faces, and tried to begin, but his lips trembled. He looked down again, thought of the fabric, the needles, the tired hands that never complained. He finally spoke. "I had prepared a long speech," he said, voice low but clear. "But after hearing the Prime Minister's words, I just want to say one thing. Everything I am is because of my mother." There was silence, then a single clap, then many. The applause was long, not loud, just long, gentle, respectful, and somewhere far away, in a small room in Madurai, Lakshmi Pichai wiped her eyes and smiled. The camera panned across the audience. Many had tears, many held hands, many remembered their own mothers. And then Sundar said something he had never said before. "I wish she could be here today, but she's watching, And now, the world sees her too. The audience stood again. That night, the story spread across the internet. News channels played the clip again and again. Social media flooded with messages. Children called their mothers. Strangers hugged in silence. People who had forgotten the names of their parents remembered, and Lakshmi Pichai became a symbol, not just of sacrifice, but of unseen power. But the story did not end there. What happened next surprised even Sundar, because someone had been watching from the shadows, someone who had a secret, and that secret would soon shake the world. But that is for part 2. The next morning, Sundar Pichai sat alone in the hotel balcony, sipping warm tea. The sunlight touched his face, but his thoughts were far away. His phone buzzed, non-stop calls, messages, tags, articles, interviews, but he ignored most of them. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. Not for something so personal. He had spoken about technology, innovation, and leadership countless times. But now, people were calling about his mother, about Lakshmi Pichai. It felt strange, but also right that Prime Minister's words had opened something inside people. Everywhere, mothers were being honored. Stories of sacrifice filled social media. Some sent photos of their mothers sewing or cooking or riding buses to work. Others shared memories of childhood struggles. Sundar read many of them with tears in his eyes. But then, one message caught his attention. It came from an unknown number. "I need to speak with you. I knew your mother before the world did. It's about something important. Something she never told you." He stared at the message for a long time. Something she never told you. His hands went cold. He replied, "Who are you?" The answer came quickly. "I was her friend." And her silence kept something hidden for decades. "Meet me today, alone." There was an address, a quiet park in South Delhi. No name, no details. Sundar hesitated. It could be a mistake, a trick. But something deep inside him whispered "go." Hours later, dressed simply and wearing dark glasses, he entered the park quietly. Children were playing. An old man fed birds, and on a far bench, under a neem tree, sat a woman in a pale blue sari. She looked old but strong. Her eyes were sharp, her face calm. Sundar walked toward her. "You came," she said. He nodded, unsure what to say. "Sit," she said gently. He sat beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she began. "I knew your mother when she was just 17. We worked at the same textile factory in Madurai. We were poor, both of us. But she was different." "Different how?" Sundar asked, barely above a whisper. "She had a dream," the woman said. "Not for herself, but for her unborn son. Even before you were born, she said one day, 'My son will go to big places. Not like us. He will not carry threads and needles. He will carry light.'" Sundar's throat tightened. "She saved every rupee, worked double shifts, not just for your school, but for something else, something secret." The woman paused. "Do you know the name Ravi Sup?" she asked. Sundar blinked. "Yes, he was my science teacher." "He was more than that," the woman said. "Your mother paid for his night classes when he couldn't afford them, years before he became your teacher. She said, 'One day, this man will teach my son about stars.'" Sundar looked away, stunned. "Your mother believed in building things quietly, helping others in silence. You were never the only one she was lifting." The woman reached into her old bag and pulled out a notebook, wrapped in cloth. This was hers. She wrote letters in it. To you, to herself, to God. Sundar took it slowly, opened the first page. The handwriting was hers. Simple, neat. "Dear son," it began. "If you ever read this, it means you've become something I only dreamed of. I never told you everything. I didn't want to burden you, but you should know." His hands shook. The pages were filled with hopes, fears, small victories, and silent pain. Stories of bills unpaid, of food skipped, of kindnesses she received and gave, and most of all, faith in him. Why didn't she give this to me? Sundar asked, voice cracking. Because she wanted you to walk forward, not look back, the woman said. He held the notebook tightly. It felt heavier than gold. There's more, the woman whispered. What? He asked. Lakshmi once saved my daughter's life during a factory fire. She ran into the smoke and carried her out. No one ever knew. The factory owner never even thanked her. She said, some things don't need applause. They need to be done. Tears streamed down Sundar's cheeks. And now, the woman said, placing a hand on his arm, you are her applause. The world's applause. Don't forget that. He nodded silently. What is your name? He asked finally. Kamala, she said. I was her shadow. And now, I pass this to you. They stood up. Sundar bowed slightly, and she did the same. Then she turned and walked away slowly, disappearing into the trees. Sundar stood still for a long time, the notebook pressed to his chest. That night, he opened the notebook again. Every line was a whisper from the past. One line stood out more than all. When I stitch clothes, I imagine I am stitching the fabric of your future. Strong, kind, and bright. He closed the notebook and sat in silence. The world had seen the CEO. Now, he was ready to show them the sun. The next day, he made a decision. He called a press conference, not to talk about profits or products, but to tell a story, and in that story was a twist no one expected, one that would bring not just tears, but also change. But that is for part 3. 2 days after the speech. The media expected Sundar Pichai to return to business, but Sundar had changed. He had spent the night reading every page of his mother's notebook. Each word was a doorway into a past he had never fully known. He saw her handwriting grow tired over the years, the ink fading, but the hope never fading. In her silence, she had created a legacy greater than any title, and now it was his turn to carry it forward. He stood before a hall packed with reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones lined the long table in front of him. But Sundar had no speech, no paper, just a small worn-out notebook in his hand. He took a deep breath. Thank you for coming, he said softly. Today, I will not talk about Google. I will not talk about technology. I will talk about something much more powerful. He held up the notebook. This is my mother's journal. She wrote it in secret, over the years. It contains stories of struggle, dreams, pain, and faith. Stories she never told me. Stories that changed me in just 2 nights. He paused. The room went quiet. My mother lived a life of sacrifice, and she was not alone. There are millions, like her, people who do great things quietly. We celebrate those who make it to the top, but we forget those who lift others to get there. He opened a page and read aloud. Today I used my last money to buy a book for my son. I told him it was from the school, so he would not feel guilty. His voice shook. She gave up food, comfort, dreams, and still smiled. Reporters lowered their cameras. There's something else I must share, Sundar said, now looking directly at the crowd. My mother helped others without ever speaking of it. She paid for a teacher's classes. She saved a child in a factory fire. She believed that building others is the best way to build the world. A journalist stood up, eyes wide. Sir, why are you telling us this now? Sundar took a long breath. Because the world needs reminders. That greatness comes in quiet forms. And because I am starting something today. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I am starting the Lakshmi Foundation. In my mother's name. Its goal is simple support, invisible heroes. Mothers, fathers, teachers, workers. Anyone who gives without asking. The crowd stirred. It will provide education, healthcare, support for single mothers, help for factory workers. And yes, it will teach their children to dream, just like my mother taught me. A reporter raised her hand. This is beautiful, sir. But what inspired this sudden step? Sundar smiled softly. A stranger, an old friend of my mother. She gave me this journal, told me the things my mother never said, and reminded me that silence sometimes carries the loudest stories. Another reporter asked, "What will you do next?" Sundar looked at the camera. "I will go home, to Madurai, to the house where I was raised, and I will sit in the room where she stitched dreams. Because I believe that before you move forward, you must return to where it all began." The press conference ended, but the effect rippled across the world within hours. News channels ran with the story. Sundar Pichai starts foundation in memory of his mother. From Silicon Valley to stitching rooms, a journey of gratitude. Lakshmi Pichai's legacy lives on. People cried. People called their mothers. People donated, but there was something no one knew yet. Someone else had been watching the news. An old man, sitting in a quiet hospital bed, his hands trembled as he reached for the remote. He turned up the volume, watched Sundar speak, then looked at the photograph beside his bed. A young Lakshmi Pichai. He whispered, "You never told him." A nurse walked in. "Are you okay, sir?" The man nodded. "Can you write a letter for me?" he asked. "I need to send something before it's too late." He dictated the letter slowly. "Dear Sundar," it began, "I knew your mother long ago. I knew her better than anyone. And there's something you must know about your name, about your birth, and about a promise she made to me." The nurse stopped. "Sir, is this true?" The old man looked out the window. "Truth is like a seed," he said. "It grows when it's ready." He handed the letter to the nurse. "Please, send this. He must know." And with that, the story took another turn. Because the letter would change everything Sundar believed about his past. But that is for part 4. 3 days later, Sundar Pichai stood in front of the small house in Madurai, where he had spent his childhood. The paint was peeling. The door creaked. The walls carried memories like old wounds. He hadn't returned in years, but now, every step felt sacred. He stepped inside quietly. The old sewing machine still stood in the corner, covered in a thin cloth. He ran his fingers along its surface. Rust had set in, but the shape was the same. The same sound he remembered from sleepless night. Click thud, hiss of the foot pedal. His mother had spent most of her life beside that machine. The house was quiet. His cousin Ramesh, who still lived nearby, brought him tea and sat silently with him. "It feels like she's still here," Sundar whispered. Ramesh nodded. "She never really left, Anna. People here still talk about her. The woman who never asked for help but gave it anyway." Sundar opened the small box he had brought from Delhi. Inside was her notebook and a framed photo of her smiling, one of the few he had. He placed it next to the sewing machine. It looked right just then. His phone buzzed. A message from his office assistant in Chennai. "Sir, a handwritten letter came for you from a hospital in Kerala, marked urgent. I'm scanning it now." A minute later, the scan appeared. Sundar opened the file. The first line shook him. "Dear Sundar, your mother and I shared a past you never knew. I am your father." He stopped breathing for a second. He read on. "My name is Arun Mohan Lakshmi, and I met when she was just 18. I was a young man, working at the textile factory. We fell in love, but my family did not accept her. She was poor, independent, and bold. They forced me to marry someone else. I left. I was a coward. But before I left, I made her a promise. I said, if you ever have a child, name him Sundar, because he will grow up beautiful in spirit. She never told me if she did. Years passed. I lived in silence. I had no other children. I never forgot her. And one day, I saw your name in the paper. I saw your face, and I knew The eyes were hers. She raised you alone. I was not there. I do not ask for forgiveness, only to tell you the truth, and to say, she was the strongest woman I ever knew. I am now at Shanfi Hospital in Kochi. I do not have long, but if you wish to ask anything, I will wait. The message ended with a shaking signature. Sundar put the phone down. Ramesh noticed the change in his face. What happened, Anna? Sundar took a deep breath. I think I just found my father. The next morning, he flew to Kochi. The hospital was small, clean, quiet. The smell of medicine and silence filled the air. The nurses were kind. They led him to room 214. Inside, an old man sat in bed, thin and pale, eyes closed. Sundar stepped closer. Mr. Arun Mohan, he asked gently. The man opened his eyes slowly. When he saw Sundar, he smiled faintly. You came. Sundar pulled a chair beside him and sat down. I read your letter, he said. Are you? And nodded, his eyes moist. I have no right to call myself your father, he said softly. But I had to tell you. I had to tell someone. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Sundar spoke. She never mentioned you. Not once. She raised me on her own. She carried every burden. She never blamed anyone. That was Lakshmi, Arun said. Stronger than storms, quieter than prayers. Sundar leaned forward. Tell me about her. When you knew her, please. For the next hour, Arun told stories. How Lakshmi used to hum while stitching. How she always offered her lunch to someone else. How she once stitched a shirt for him and left it at his door after he married someone else. How she never spoke of pain, only of work, only of hope. Sundar listened, tears falling silently. I regret everything, Arun said. I lost both of you, but even in her silence, she made me a better man. I hope you forgive me for not being there. Sundar looked at him. I don't know if I can forgive, he said honestly, but I can understand. Arun closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. That's more than I deserve. Before Sundar left, he took out the notebook. She wrote this, he said. You're in it once, just once. He opened to the page. I met a man once who gave me a name for my child. Sundar. I kept it not for him, but because it was right. My son is beautiful inside. The name suits him, Arun smiled, holding the page with shaking fingers. Thank you, he whispered. Sundar stood, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, goodbye. He walked out of the hospital into the evening sun. The light felt different. Back at his hotel, he sat by the window, the notebook in his lap, a strange calm inside him. His mother had carried secrets, pain, hope, and now, so did he. But this was not the end, because the foundation was about to launch, and one woman was about to walk into his life with a story that would change his mission forever. But that is for part 5. The day of the foundation's launch arrived. The hall in Chennai was full. Men and women from all walks of life had come, teachers, factory workers, nurses, street vendors, students. Sundar wanted them there, because this was not about cameras. It was about faces, real faces, the kind his mother had served all her life. Banners read the Lakshmi Foundation, honoring quiet heroes. The room smelled of jasmine and tea. Volunteers moved around handing pamphlets. There was no luxury, only warmth. As Sundar walked onto the stage, dressed in a simple white kurta, the room stood to applaud, not because of who he was, but because of what he was doing. He began to speak, holding his mother's notebook in his hand. When we speak of progress, he said, we often think of machines and markets, but true progress comes from people. People who give silently, who hold up others without seeking credit. He looked across the room. This foundation is for them, for every mother who skipped her meal so her child could eat, for every father who walked to work to save bus fare, for every teacher who stayed after class to help a struggling student. He paused and held up the notebook. My mother left me these pages. They are more valuable to me than gold, and I want to pass this value forward. The crowd listened. In deep silence, he explained how the foundation would work. It would give micro-scholarships to the children of single parents. It would create skill centers for women in small towns. It would provide health care for laborers who had no voice. It would document the stories of ordinary heroes, so they were never forgotten. After the speech, Sundar stepped off the stage and sat among the people, one by one. Some came forward to share their stories. A young boy whose mother cleaned offices. At night, a nurse who raised her 3 sisters after their parents died. A blind teacher who taught 20 village children to read. Each one received a hug from Sundar. Not a handshake, a hug. He didn't want a stage between them. Then, as the program was about to close, an elderly woman stepped forward. She walked slowly, supported by a cane. Her sari was clean, but faded. Her eyes were sharp and still bright. She held an envelope in her hand. "May I speak?" she asked. Sundar nodded and offered her the mic. Her voice was soft but strong. "My name is Meenakshi. I once worked in the same factory as Lakshmi Pichai. She saved my life." The room stilled. There was a time when I had no money, no food. My husband had left me. My son had fever. I had nothing. One day Lakshmi found me crying behind the factory. She didn't ask questions. She gave me her lunch, her money, and even her gold earrings. She said, "Don't give up. Your son will rise." And then she disappeared into her work again. Meenakshi held up the envelope. "My son is now a doctor. He works in Pune. He told me to give this to you, Sundar." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a photo, a young man in a white coat, standing beside a hospital bed, smiling. Written on the back was, "Because Lakshmi gave, I live." Sundar felt something in his chest shift. Meenakshi wasn't finished. Lakshmi saved many lives, not just with food or money, but with belief. She believed in people. That's what made her different. Sundar stood and walked over to her. "Thank you," he whispered. Double quotes, "No, Bader," she said, touching his cheek. "Thank you for remembering her, for making the world see what she hid for so long." Cameras flashed, but no one cared. The moment was real. That night, as Sundar sat alone in his room, he placed the photo beside his mother's notebook. A family was forming not by blood, but by stories. People from all over the country began sending letters to the foundation. Stories poured in, of sacrifice, of hope, of survival. A rickshaw driver who taught his daughter maths at night under street lamps. A widow who sold flowers to send her son to college. A girl who walked 8 kilometers every day for school. Lakshmi Pichai's name was now more than a memory. She was a movement. And yet, Sundar could not sleep that night. Something still tugged at him. A question. What else had she kept from him? The notebook was full of wisdom, but he had noticed some pages were missing. Torn out. Where had they gone? And who had them? The next morning, the answer arrived, in the form of a brown envelope. No sender's name, no address. Inside were the missing pages, and one line on the top of the first page. "I wrote these for someone else, but now, they belong to you." The words that followed would shake Sundar's understanding of his mother's past, because these pages were not written by her alone. They were letters to someone he had never heard of, and yet, someone who had been watching, from the shadows. But that is for part 6. The brown envelope rested in Sundar's hands like a stone. His fingers moved slowly as he pulled out the missing pages, soft, worn, with edges darkened by time. His heart beat faster. These were not like the other entries. They were written in pairs, one by Lakshmi Pichai, the other in a completely different handwriting, a man's. The first page was dated over 35 years ago. "Dear Raghavan, I saw your letter under the gate. You always find a way to reach me. don't you? I'm fine. The boy is growing well. He's smart like you. But he has my stubbornness. He doesn't give up. He asks questions. Lots of them. I wish you could hear him laugh. It's bright, like early sunlight. Sundar's brow furrowed. Who was Raghavan? He turned to the next page. Lakshmi, I keep my distance, because you asked. Me too. But every time I see a boy in the street with your eyes, I wonder if he is ours. I want to help, but you said not to. So I send the money quietly, through the temple box. I know you don't touch it. That's just like you. But one day, when he grows up, will you tell him I tried? A cold breeze passed through the room. Stood still, the pages trembling in his hands. There was someone else. Someone his mother never spoke about. Someone who had loved her. Someone who had stayed. Hidden. Letter after letter told the story. They had worked together at the post office. Lakshmi was 18. Raghavan was 22. He was kind, gentle, and deeply respectful. They had fallen in love slowly, through conversations and shared lunches. But before anything could grow, he had been transferred to another city. Lakshmi's family had rejected the idea of marriage. They said he was too poor, not good enough. But Raghavan had written letters, dozens of them, and Lakshmi had kept every one, hidden in a cloth bag behind the cupboard. The last letter was dated a month before Sundar's birth. Dear Lakshmi, this is my final letter. Not because I love you any less, but because I respect your silence. If the boy is mine, I pray you forgive me for not being there. If he is not, still forgive me for loving you more than my own future. I will not bother you again. But wherever I go, you are my prayer. The handwriting ended there. No signature. Just a tear stain that had bled into the paper. Sundar sat down slowly, his breath shaky. Had his mother loved someone else? Was Raghavan his real father? But then he opened the final page, the one she had written, after years of silence. To my son, one day, you may find these letters. I never told you, because I didn't want your past to confuse your path. Whether you came from love or silence, you are mine. You were mine when you cried your first time. You were mine when you tied your first shoelace. And you will always be mine, no matter whose blood you carry. Because it is not blood that raises a child, it is hands. And I gave you my hands. Sundar wept, not because he was confused, but because he was finally complete. His mother had loved, had lost, had lived, and yet, she gave him every piece of herself without asking for anything back. That evening, he stood again at the foundation's office. Before him stood a crowd of people. Some he knew, some strangers, but all of them had come for the same reason, to remember Lakshmi. He spoke slowly, every word like a thread stitching the fabric of truth. My mother had many stories, he began. Some she shared, some she buried. I have learned more about her in these weeks than I knew in all my life. She loved, she forgave, she hid pain so others could smile. He looked around. But today, I want to speak to every son and daughter listening. Your parents are not just your parents. They were once people with dreams, heartbreaks, secrets, and sacrifices. Ask them, listen to them, honor them while they are here. He paused. And to every parent, your quiet courage builds nations. It built me. The crowd was silent, moved beyond words. Then a young girl came forward. She had a folder in her hand. Sir, she said shyly, my mother is a bus conductor. She wrote this poem for your mother. Sundar opened the folder and read. She did not wear medals, nor walk on carpets. Read, but in her silence the world quietly fed with every thread. She stitched a star, and in her boy she traveled far. He looked up, eyes full of tears. He reached down, took the girl's hand, and said, your mother and mine are sisters in spirit. In the days that followed, Sundar set up a library in Madurai, in his mother's name. He filled it with books for children who had no access to dreams. The first shelf held her notebook, encased in glass. Beside it, a simple line: "These hands stitched more than cloth, they stitched hope." Letters from across the world came in. Stories of silent mothers, of teachers who taught without chalk, of fathers who sold their bicycles so daughters could study. Lakshmi Pichai had become more than a name. She had become a feeling, and Sundar Pichai, the boy from a stitched bag and flickering bulb, had finally understood his journey, not because of where he went, but because of where he came from. 2 months had passed since the launch of the Lakshmi Foundation. The stories kept arriving: letters, recordings, poems, paintings. Strangers mailed old photographs, dusty notebooks, and sometimes even the tools of their mothers forgotten. Trades. One woman sent her mother's broken rolling pin with a note: "This made 20,000 chapatis. Now my son is an engineer." Sundar sat quietly in the new foundation headquarters, a modest 2-story building built on the land where the old sewing factory once stood in Madurai. He had bought the land quietly, not for business, not for show, but for memory. Every brick was a tribute. The conference rooms were named after workers and teachers. The walls were painted with murals. One showed a woman handing a book to a child, her hands worn, her eyes calm. He had invited no press, but the people came anyway, not to take selfies, not to ask for help. They came to give thanks, to give stories, to say someone had finally seen them. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from the Prime Minister's office, but it wasn't formal, it was handwritten. Sundar read it twice before he understood the full meaning. "Dear Sundarji, I once said Lakshmi Pichai was India's strength. Today, I believe she is India's light. We have decided to honor her posthumously with the Bharat Ratna, India's highest civilian award, not for fame, but for faith, because she showed us what true service looks like. With respect, Narendra." Modi Sundar stood still for a long time. His heart raced, but not with pride, with memory. He walked into the small shrine room they had built beside the sewing machine. There, under her framed photo, he placed the letter. He whispered, "You didn't want medals, but the nation gives you one anyway." News of the announcement spread like fire. People cried in streets. Mothers wept in homes. Daughters hugged their fathers. Teachers read about Lakshmi in morning assemblies. Girls named Lakshmi were gifted sewing machines sold out in dozens of small towns, not for profit, but for remembrance. And something else happened. The international press picked up the story. Major networks ran documentaries titled "The Quiet Mother Behind India's Tech Giant, From Thread to Throne: The Lakshmi Pichai Story." How one woman's silence shaped the future of millions. Students in Africa sent drawings of her. A school in Brazil named a hall after her. A university in Japan added her quotes to their ethics course. And the most surprising moment came when Sundar Pichai stood on a stage at Stanford University and said, "My greatest teacher never finished school. She never used a computer, but she taught me to never quit. Her name was Lakshmi Pichai. She is why I am here." The audience stood. Some clapped, others cried, and in the back row sat a woman in a simple blue sari. Kmala, the same woman who had first given him the notebook. She smiled softly, and beside her sat Meenakshi, whose son now worked as a surgeon in a city hospital. After the speech, Sundar met them both backstage. He bent down, took their hands, and said, "This story began with a notebook, but it ends with you." Meenakshi nodded. Double quotes. "No, beta. It doesn't end. It begins again. Every time someone remembers her. Every time someone thanks their mother." Later that evening, Sundar returned to his room. He opened the notebook one last time. The final page had something written in a faint pencil line, almost missed. "If you become someone, remember to become someone kind." He closed the notebook and smiled. His mother had taught him many things: how to dream, how to rise, how to stay human, but most of all, how to carry others with him. And now, the boy who once studied under a flickering bulb had lit 1,000 lamps. The journey was complete, but the light had just begun.